The message arrived on a cold morning in December, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez read it 3 times before she believed it was real. She had served as humanity's voice to the galaxy for 7 years, but never once had she received a direct summons to the Obsidian Citadel. The Citadel was the heart of galactic power, a massive structure that orbited a dying red star at the very center of the Milky Way. It was older than Earth's sun, built by species that had mastered space travel when humans still lived in caves. Elena's ship took 19 days to reach the Citadel, jumping through relay gates that humanity had not built and did not fully understand. She spent those 19 days preparing herself for whatever waited ahead. When her vessel finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, she saw the Citadel for the first time with her own eyes, and her breath caught in her throat. It was enormous beyond imagination, a dark sphere covered in towers and spires that stretched outward like the branches of some cosmic tree. Lights flickered across its surface in patterns that seemed almost alive. Her shuttle docked at a port reserved for minor species, and armed guards in silver armor escorted her through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were made of a black stone that absorbed light, and Elena could hear whispers in languages she did not recognize echoing from somewhere far away. She walked for nearly an hour before reaching the council chamber. The room was circular and vast, with seats rising in rings toward a ceiling lost in shadow. 12 platforms floated in the air at the chamber's center, and on each platform sat a representative of the founding species. Elena recognized them from the file she had studied for years. The Valkyrie were beings of living crystal, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns that shifted with their moods. The Scythian collective appeared as a single robed figure, but Elena knew that thousands of tiny organisms moved beneath that cloth, thinking as one mind. The chorus of Keth was a biomechanical nightmare of metal and flesh, its voice emerging from speakers embedded in what might have been a face. And there were 9 others, each more alien and more ancient than the last High Arbiter Velseth, leader of the Valkyrie and current head of the council. Spoke first, human, the crystalline being said, its voice like wind chimes in a storm. You have been summoned to receive judgment. Elena stood alone on a small platform at the chamber's floor, surrounded by beings who had ruled the galaxy for 300,000 years. She was the representative of a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 60 years ago to these ancient powers. Humanity was barely more than clever animals who had stumbled upon fire. We do not understand, Elena said carefully, keeping her voice steady despite the fear that crawled through her chest. What crime humanity has committed? A sound rippled through the chamber that might have been laughter. No crime, Velseth replied. Merely misfortune. The High Arbiter waved one crystalline limb, and holographic displays appeared in the air around Elena. She saw star maps and energy readings and something else. Something that looked like a wave of absolute darkness moving through space. This is the Harrow, Velseth explained. A phenomenon of dark energy that consumes all matter in its path. And it is coming for your worlds. Elena studied the projections with growing horror. The wave was massive, spanning dozens of light years, and according to the data, it would reach human space in 47 years. The Council has calculated the resources required to evacuate or protect your species, Velseth continued. And we have determined that such expenditure would be wasteful. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Wasteful, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Your species is young and unproven, another founder spoke. A being of pure energy that hurt to look at directly. And the resources needed to save you would be better spent protecting established civilizations with greater contributions to galactic culture. Elena felt her hands begin to shake, but she forced them still. You are telling us, she said slowly, that we are not worth saving. We are telling you that saving you is not efficient, Velsith corrected. And the council has voted, and the decision is final. The High Arbiter's crystalline form shifted colors, moving from blue to a satisfied purple. You may evacuate what you call your best specimens to council space if you wish, Velsith added, and we will find uses for them, but the rest of your kind will remain on your worlds to face the harrow. Elena looked around the chamber at the 12 founders, and these ancient beings who had just sentenced 8 billion people to death with the same emotion one might feel when discarding old furniture. She thought about her mother back on Earth, about her nephews who had just started school, about the billions of ordinary people who would never know that their fate had been decided in this dark chamber by creatures who did not care whether they lived or died. Something changed inside Elena. In that moment, the fear that had gripped her heart began to transform, becoming something harder and hotter. It became anger. It became defiance. The founders watched her with what she assumed was curiosity, waiting for the tears and begging that they had witnessed from 100 doomed species before Elena Vasquez, ambassador of humanity, straightened her spine and lifted her chin, and she smiled. "Thank you for informing us of your decision," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And now I will inform you of ours." Velsith's colors flickered with surprise. "You do not have decisions," the High Arbiter said, "for you only have the choice to accept what we have decreed." Elena's smile widened. "No," she said simply. "We do not accept." The chamber fell silent in 300,000 years. No species facing extinction had ever said those words. Elena turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the stunned quiet. "Human," Velsith called after her, confusion and something like unease in that chiming voice. "Where are you going? And what do you think you can do?" Elena paused at the doorway and looked back at the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy. "We are going to save ourselves," she said, "and you are going to watch us do it." She walked out of the chamber and did not look back again. Elena's shuttle docked at the New Geneva space station 3 weeks later, and she walked directly to the Veyan emergency session of the United Terran Assembly. Without stopping to rest, every leader on Earth was watching through screens and holograms as she stepped onto the speaking platform. 8 billion people held their breath, Elena told them. Everything she explained the Harrow and its approach toward human space. She described the Council's decision to abandon humanity to extinction. She repeated every cold word the founders had spoken. When she finished, the assembly erupted into chaos. Some leaders shouted in fear, while others demanded immediate negotiations. A few broke down, crying at the thought of their children facing annihilation. The noise grew louder and more desperate until a single voice cut through the madness. "Enough." Fleet Admiral Marcus Chun stood from his seat in the military section, and his voice carried the weight of 40 years defending humanity among the stars. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and scars on his face from battles the public would never know about. When he spoke, people listened. "They have sentenced us to death," Chun said, his words slow and deliberate. "And they expect us to beg for mercy or lie down and wait for the end." He walked toward the central platform where Elena stood. "I have fought pirates and defended colonies and watched good soldiers die protecting worlds that some alien council now says are worthless." His eyes swept across the assembly. "I will not accept their judgment, and I will not tell my grandchildren that we simply gave up." Chum stood beside Elena and faced the leaders of humanity. "If the galaxy will not save us," he declared, "then we save ourselves." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning, and then, slowly, people began to stand. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. The assembly rose to its feet. And for the first time in human history, every nation and every faction and every political Enemies stood united under a single purpose. They would not go quietly into extinction. They would fight. The next 18 months saw humanity transform in ways the galaxy had never witnessed. Every scientist on Earth abandoned their normal research to study. The Harrow physicists and engineers and astronomers worked together without concern for borders or profit. Universities shared data freely, while corporations opened their laboratories to government researchers. The competition that had defined human progress for centuries vanished overnight, replaced by cooperation born from desperation. Admiral Chun reorganized the entire military structure of humanity into a single unified fleet. Ships that had once defended individual nations now trained together under combined command. Young people volunteered in numbers that overwhelmed recruitment centers, and older veterans came out of retirement to serve once more. Factories that had built consumer goods switched to producing ship components. Mining operations expanded across the solar system to gather the raw materials humanity would need. And through it all, the Galactic Council watched with bemused curiosity. Reports flowed back to the Obsidian Citadel describing humanity's frantic activity. The founders found it entertaining in a sad sort of way, like watching an insect try to escape a closing hand. Let them build their little ships, Velsith remarked during one council session. For the Harrow has consumed species far more advanced than these humans, and their efforts will amount to nothing. The other founders agreed with varying degrees of amusement. The Scythian collective calculated that humanity had a 0.3% chance of survival. The chorus of Keth simply noted that human organic material would add interesting variety to the fired Harrow's consumption pattern. But humanity did something none of the founders expected. They launched probes. Thousands of specially designed vessels flew into space that the Harrow had already touched, gathering data from regions that every other species had only ever fled. These probes were crewed by galactic standards, built quickly with human technology that the founders considered primitive. Most of them were destroyed almost immediately, but some survived long enough to send back information, and that information changed everything. Human scientists discovered that the Harrow was not random chaos. It had patterns in structures and behaviors that could be measured and potentially predicted. No species in galactic history had ever studied the phenomenon directly, because every species had simply run away when it approached. Humanity was the first to be curious enough, or desperate enough, to actually look. 18 months after the council sentence, Ambassador Elena Vasquez requested permission to address the full Galactic Council once more. High Arbiter Velsith denied her request with barely concealed contempt. The provisional species known as humanity has no standing to demand council attention, came the official response, and their time would be better spent preparing for the end. Elena had expected this answer. She had prepared for it on the day she would have addressed the council. Elena stood instead in a small broadcast room aboard a human station around her. Technicians worked at consoles linked to every communication relay humanity had access to. Are we connected? She asked. Yes, Ambassador, the lead technician replied. We have access to civilian broadcast networks across 407 inhabited systems, and the Council cannot block us without revealing they are actively suppressing information. Elena nodded and straightened her uniform. The broadcast began. Citizens of the galaxy, she said, her voice carrying to trillions of beings across thousands of light years. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I am the Ambassador of Humanity, a species your council has sentenced to extinction. She paused to let the words sink in. 18 months ago, the 12 founders decided that my people were not worth saving from the Harrow, and they expected us to accept this judgment. But they were wrong. Elena looked directly into the camera. We have studied the Harrow, she continued. And we have learned things that no species has ever known about this phenomenon. Things the Council does not want you to hear. She took a deep breath. In 3 days, I will return to the Obsidian Citadel, and I will present evidence that changes everything we think we know about the Harrow and about the founders who rule this galaxy. Her eyes hardened. The Council erased the minutes of our first meeting because they did not want the galaxy to know what they said to us. But we remember every word. Elena leaned forward. You declared us dead, she said, her voice rising with fierce determination. But we declare ourselves otherwise, and in 3 days, the galaxy will learn the truth. The broadcast ended, and across 407 star systems, billions of beings began to ask questions that the founders had never wanted answered. The Obsidian Citadel had never seen crowds like this before. Ships from across the galaxy gathered in orbit around the ancient structure, carrying journalists and diplomats and ordinary citizens who wanted to witness whatever humanity was about to reveal. The Council had tried to prevent Elena's return, but her broadcast had made that impossible. Billions of beings now watched through live feeds as her shuttle approached the Citadel's main docking port. Inside the Council chamber, the 12 founders waited on their floating platforms with something that looked very much like nervousness. High Arbiter. Velsith's crystalline body flickered through colors that no translator could interpret. This is a mistake. The Scythian collective whispered through their robed vessel. For we should have silenced this human when we had the chance. Silencing her now would only confirm that we have something to hide. The chorus of Keth replied, mechanical voice buzzing with irritation. And we must let her speak, and then dismiss whatever claim she makes. The chamber doors opened, and Elena walked in. She was not alone this time. Behind her came a team of human scientists, carrying data devices and holographic projectors. And beside her walked Admiral Chun in full military dress. Uniform Elena took her position on the central platform and looked up at the founders who had sentenced her species to death 300,000 years ago, she began. Her voice amplified to reach every corner of the massive chamber. The 12 founding species fought a war against an enemy whose name has been erased from all records. Velsith's colors shifted sharply. This is not relevant to during that war, Elena continued, speaking over the High Arbiter without hesitation. Your ancestors built a weapon, a device that could tear apart the fabric of space itself and consume everything in its path. She gestured to her scientists, and holograms appeared throughout the chamber. They showed ancient diagrams and mathematical formulas and construction plans written in languages that predated current galactic civilization. You called it the Harvester, Elena said, and you used it to destroy your enemies completely. But there was a problem. The hologram shifted to show energy readings and trajectory calculations. The Harvester could not be stopped once activated, and it grew with each star system it consumed, feeding on the matter and energy it destroyed. Elena turned to face the watching galaxy through the broadcast cameras that lined the chamber walls. The Harrow is not a natural phenomenon, she declared, for it is your weapon, running out of control for 300,000 years. And the founders have known this truth since the beginning. The chamber erupted into noise as representatives from hundreds of species shouted questions and demands. Velsith's voice cut through the chaos like breaking glass. These are lies, the High Arbiter screamed. Fabrications created by a desperate species trying to avoid their fate. Elena smiled coldly, then explained this. New holograms appeared, showing records and documents that bore official council seals. 17 species have been consumed by the Harrow since the founders took control of this galaxy, Elena said. And each time, the council had the opportunity to stop it. But stopping it would have required admitting what the Harrow truly was. She pointed to dates and locations scattered across the galaxy. The Volmore asked for help 90,000 years ago, and the council voted to abandon them because evacuation costs were too high. But the real reason was that saving them would have exposed the truth. Another set of records appeared. The Crucian hegemony begged for assistance 60,000 years ago. And again, the council refused, claiming insufficient resources, while secretly fearing that intervention would reveal their guilt. Elena's voice grew harder with each word. The Hollow Singers were denied aid 40,000 years ago, and the crystalline mines were abandoned 20,000 years after that. And the Ocean Dreamers were left to die just 8,000 years ago. She swept her arm across the chamber. 17 species, billions upon billions of lives, all sacrificed to keep one secret hidden. And you were going to add humanity to that list. How did you obtain these records? The chorus of Keth demanded, mechanical voice crackling with something that sounded like fear, for they were sealed and encrypted and stored in systems that no outside species could access. Admiral Chun stepped forward. You made a mistake when you dismissed humans as primitive, he said. For while your species were perfecting space travel and energy manipulation, ours were learning to survive against impossible odds. He smiled with grim satisfaction. We are very good at finding information that others want to keep hidden. And your encryption methods were designed to stop advanced civilizations, not stubborn humans who refused to accept that any lock could not be picked. Chun held up a small device. We recovered the erased minutes of 10,000 council sessions, including every vote to abandon a species to the Harrow. And we found testimony from the 17 species you let die. Their final messages preserved in the quantum, static between stars where your cleanup crews never thought to look. The device activated, and voices began to speak. They were alien voices, translated into standard galactic language. And they told stories of fear and betrayal and desperate pleas for help that never came. One voice belonged to a Velmarie elder who had realized the truth about the Harrow in their final days. Another came from a Crucian scientist who had begged the council to let her people fight rather than simply flee. A third was a child of the Ocean Dreamers, asking why no one would save them. The voices went on and on, filling the chamber with the weight of 300,000 years of hidden guilt. When the recording finally ended, the chamber was silent. Velsith stood frozen on the crystalline platform. Colors faded to a dull gray. This changes nothing, the High Arbiter said weakly. For the Harrow cannot be stopped regardless of its origin, and humanity will still be consumed. Elena shook her head. You are wrong, she said. For our scientists have analyzed the data from our probes, and we believe we have found a way to destroy the Harrow permanently. She turned to face the galaxy one more time. We will not run, and we will not beg, and we will not let you abandon us the way you abandoned 17 species before. Elena's voice rang through the chamber with absolute conviction. We are going to fight the Harrow, she declared. And we are going to win, and when we do, this galaxy will never forget what the founders tried to hide. She walked toward the exit, with her team following behind. Watch us, she called back to the silent council, and learn what happens when you underestimate humanity. The doors closed behind her, and across the galaxy, species that had trusted the council for millennia began to demand answers. The old order was starting to crack. 30 years had passed since Elena's revelation shattered the galaxy's trust in the founders. The council had collapsed into endless arguments as member species demanded accountability for centuries of hidden crimes. 3 of the founding species had withdrawn entirely, unable to face the shame of what their ancestors had done. 2 others had gone completely silent, their representatives refusing to speak, even when addressed directly. But none of that mattered to the humans preparing to face the Harrow. The galactic chaos meant that no help was coming, And humanity had known from the beginning that they would stand alone. Admiral Chun, now 93 years old, but still sharp as a blade, stood on the bridge of the command ship Defiance and watched the fleet assemble. 1,200 vessels filled the space around him, each one built specifically for what was about to happen. They were not warships in the traditional sense, for they carried no weapons designed to fight other vessels. Instead, they were engines of creation, massive reactors capable of generating the energy of a small star. The plan had taken 3 decades to develop and another 15 years to build. Human scientists had discovered that the Harrow was essentially a self-sustaining reaction, a wave of destructive energy that fed on the matter it destroyed to grow ever larger. The only way to stop such a reaction was to overwhelm it with an equal and opposite force. They would create a counterwave, a burst of creative energy powerful enough to cancel out the Harrow's destruction. The mathematics said it was possible, the engineering said it might work, the cost said it would require 40,000 lives. Every ship in the lattice formation would be vaporized when the reactors fired simultaneously, and there was no way to change that equation. Admiral Chun had asked for volunteers, and 50,000 people had offered their lives within the first hour. Choosing which 40,000 would be allowed to sacrifice themselves had been the hardest decision of his entire career. Now those chosen ones sat at their stations throughout the fleet, young and old, soldiers and scientists, people from every nation and background that humanity had ever produced. They knew they would not survive, and they had come anyway. Elena Vasquez, now Ambassador Emeritus at 71 years old, had insisted on being aboard the Defiance. Chun had tried to refuse her, arguing that she was too important to risk. But Elena had simply smiled and reminded him that she had been there at the beginning and she would be there at the end. She stood beside him now on the bridge, watching the view screens as the Harrow approached. It was visible at last, a wall of absolute darkness that swallowed the stars as it moved. The ancient weapon of the Founders was even more terrible than the records had suggested, stretching across 50 light-years of space and growing larger with every system it consumed. All ships report ready, the communications officer announced, her voice steady despite the fear that everyone felt. Lattice formation is complete, and reactor synchronization is at 99.7%. Chun nodded and opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Chun speaking to all crews of the Defiance fleet. His voice carried across 1,200 ships and into the hearts of 40,000 people who had chosen to die 30 years ago. A council of ancient beings decided that humanity was not worth saving, and they expected us to accept that judgment, to lie down and wait for extinction like so many species before us. He paused, feeling the weight of the moment. They were wrong about us. Chun looked at the approaching darkness on his screens. What we do today is not about proving them wrong, for we already did that when we refused to give up, and it is not about revenge, for we are better than that. His old hands gripped the railing before him. What we do today is about our children and their children, and every generation that will come after us, for they deserve a future, and we are going to give them one. The Harrow's edge was now close enough that individual stars could be seen winking out of existence as the wave consumed them. I am not going to lie to you and say that help is coming, for we both know it is not, and I am not going to promise that we will all survive, for we both know we will not. Chun's voice grew stronger. But I will tell you this, my brothers and sisters, my fellow humans, my family, for that is what you are to me now. He straightened his spine despite his age. Today we prove that there is no force in this universe strong enough to destroy humanity. For even if we fall, our defiance will echo through eternity. And species 1,000,000 years from now will tell stories about the day humans faced the end of everything and refused to blink. The communications officer was crying silently at her station, so were half the bridge crew. "Prepare to fire on my command," Chun said, "and know that I have never been more proud to be human than I am right now." He turned to Elena. "Any last words?" "Ambassador?" Elena smiled, the same fierce smile she had shown the council 3 decades ago. "Just one thing." She activated the broadcast system that would carry her voice across the galaxy to every species watching this moment. "You taught us that the stars determine fate," she said, her words reaching trillions of beings, "and we have decided to disagree." The Harrow's shadow fell across the fleet for a moment. Everything was silent. Then Admiral Marcus Chun spoke one final word: fire. 1,200 ships ignited their reactors simultaneously. A wall of white light erupted from the human fleet. Energy levels that the galaxy had never seen outside of natural stellar phenomena. The counterwave slammed into the Harrow with the force of 1,000 supernova for 11 minutes. Humanity held back the end of their world for 11 minutes. 40,000 people burned brighter than stars, pouring everything they had into the fight against oblivion for 11 minutes. The impossible happened, and then the darkness began to crack. Fractures appeared in the Harrow's structure, lines of light spreading through the ancient weapon like veins of fire. The self-sustaining reaction that had consumed 17 species and countless worlds started to collapse inward. The counterwave was working. The Harrow was dying. When the light finally faded, the viewing screens showed empty space where the wave had been. The darkness was gone, so were the 1,200 ships of the Defiance fleet. Admiral Chun was gone. Ambassador Vasquez was gone. 40,000 heroes who had given everything were gone. But humanity survived, and the stars would never forget what they had witnessed. The silence lasted for 3 days across the galaxy. No one spoke about what had happened. Every species, from the mightiest founders to the smallest colony worlds, simply watched the empty space where the Harrow had been and tried to understand what they had witnessed. Humanity had done the impossible, a species that the Council had dismissed as primitive newcomers, a people that the founders had sentenced to death without a second thought, had destroyed a threat that had haunted the galaxy for 300,000 years. 40,000 humans had given their lives to save not just their own worlds, but every world. The Harrow would have eventually consumed. The gratitude came slowly at first. Single messages from isolated colonies expressing thanks to the species that had sacrificed so much. Then the messages became a flood. Species that had never contacted humanity before sent delegations offering friendship, and alliance worlds that had supported the Council's abandonment of Earth now begged forgiveness for their silence. Former enemies became allies. Overnight, as the galaxy realized that humanity had saved them all, on the 4th day after the battle, the Galactic Council met for the last time. High Arbiter Velsith stood alone on the crystalline platform, for most of the other founders had refused to attend. "We must address the situation," Velsith said to the nearly empty chamber. Crystal form dull and gray with exhaustion, for the humans have created a power vacuum that threatens stability. "The humans have done nothing of the kind," a voice replied from the visitors gallery. Velsith looked up to see representatives from over 400 species filling the seats that had once held only council members. "You created this situation," the speaker continued. "A being from a species called the Threll that had been a council member for 50,000 years. When you decided that some lives were worth less than others." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gallery. "The council is dissolved," the Thrall representative declared, "for we have voted among ourselves, and not a single species supports continuing this institution." Velsith's form flickered with something that might have been shock. "You cannot dissolve the council," the High Arbiter protested. For the founders have ruled this galaxy since before your species existed. And your rule ends today, another voice said. Because we choose to end it one by one. The species in the gallery stood and walked out of the chamber. They left Velsith alone on the platform, surrounded by empty seats and the weight of 300 millennia of hidden crimes. The trials began a month later. Each of the 12 founding species faced judgment for their role in creating the Harrow and hiding its origins. Some species, like the ones who had withdrawn in shame after Elena's revelation, accepted responsibility and cooperated fully with the investigations. Others, led by the Velkari, tried to argue that they had done what was necessary for galactic stability. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Human hackers had recovered records going back hundreds of thousands of years, documenting every decision the founders had made to protect their secret. Testimony from survivors of species thought extinct added voices that the founders had never expected to hear again in the end. The founding species were stripped of all political power and required to pay reparations to every world the Harrow had touched. It was not revenge that motivated these punishments, but justice, a concept that the founders had forgotten long ago. 1 year after the battle, a new institution gathered for the first time in a station built specifically for this purpose. They called it the Galactic Assembly, and it was founded on principles that humanity had insisted upon. Every species, no matter how young or small, had an equal voice. No species could be abandoned without the consent of all others, and the minutes of every session would be preserved forever, accessible to any citizen who wanted to read them. The first speaker to address the assembly was a young woman named Sophia Chun, granddaughter of the admiral who had led the Defiance fleet to its final battle. She had been chosen to represent humanity at this historic moment, carrying forward the legacy of those who had sacrificed everything. My grandfather believed that the measure of a civilization was not its power or its technology, Sophia said, looking out at representatives from thousands of species, but how it treated those who could not fight back. She thought of her grandfather's final words, broadcast across the galaxy just before he ordered his fleet to fire. Humanity was given no help when we faced extinction. She continued, and we found a way to survive anyway. But that does not mean we want others to suffer as we did. Sophia turned to face the section where the former founders sat, diminished and disgraced but still present. Some of you expect us to demand revenge for what the council did to us, she said. And some of you think we should seek to dominate this assembly the way the founders once dominated the council. She shook her head. You are wrong on both counts. Sophia raised her voice so that every being in the chamber could hear her clearly. We offer instead what no one offered us. For we offer partnership and friendship and the promise that no species will ever face extinction, alone as long as humanity has the power to help. She looked directly at Velsith, who sat silent in the corner of the former founders section. You sentenced us to death because you thought we were too young to matter, Sophia said. And we proved you wrong, but we do not hold that against you. A ripple of surprise moved through the assembly. Someone has to be the first to forgive, Sophia explained. And it might as well be the species too stubborn to die. She smiled. And it was her grandmother Elena's smile, fierce and warm at the same time. We invite every species here, including the founders, to join us in exploring the space where the Harrow once existed. For we will study its remains and make sure that no such weapon can ever be built again. Sophia stepped back from the podium. This is the future humanity chooses. Not one of vengeance or domination, but one of cooperation and hope. And we invite all of you to build it with us. The assembly was silent for a long moment then. Slowly, the representatives began to stand. They rose one by one. Species that had been enemies for millennia, standing beside each other in acknowledgement of a new beginning. Even Velsith eventually stood, crystalline form brightening for the first time in months. when the last representative had risen. The assembly records noted that Sophia Chun's proposal was accepted. Unanimously, they did not record the tears that fell across Amasa. 1,000 worlds. They did not need to. Some things are remembered without words, and the galaxy would never forget the day humanity showed them a better way.